Okay, so this should be a very quick companion video just to go over how to do a simple stream reader and writer to basically let you read in configuration settings, and also I'm just going to do a very quick overview of how to then write to a file so that then if you wanted to do, say, character settings for a bot or something like that, you could easily save those and then load them as needed. If you read through the actual guide for this section, it covers all the basics. I'm just going to quickly go over how to write these actual methods, because it's a lot easier to explain with a visual aid than it is to just write out every single step and why I'm doing that in a large text document. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up the example proxy here. This should be sort of your basic window when you first open it up. You have nothing open, it's not all that important. As I said in the guide, you sort of have to decide when you're going to be loading the data. Now, seeing as it's used to set up the proxy, you're going to want to read in that settings file before you actually start the proxy, or at least the listeners and the actual sort of meat of it. Now, all programs start in the main method here, which, seeing as this is a WinForm program, it actually doesn't actually do anything in this. If you look at most console programs, they have a lot more going on in here, some logic, all your loading and all that good stuff, such as with a Conquer private server. This is what's important here. It's running a new, I'm just calling it GUI here because that's what it is. It's my super basic layout, which isn't actually doing anything yet, but it was just something so you could see how to lay it out and you wouldn't have to do all that yourself. Makes it a little prettier for people to get used to. Now, as you notice, when you double-click WinForm, unlike most CS files, it opens the visual representation of it, the designer. Now, if you right-click it, you can view code, or as it showed there, you can push F7 while it's active, and it will open the code window. This is where it's actually starting to sort of initialize everything. I have my listeners here so that it can accept connections from a client and all the action to take when it receives a connection or a packet or a disconnection for each of those listeners. Now note, I did set up a few different listeners for login server. That's because TQ uses different authentication ports for different server groups. It's not super important, you don't need to think about it. I just thought I'd mention why these are here. If you were trying to, say, add support for a private server or for an international version of Conquer, you would need to figure out what game port, off port, all that good stuff that you're going to need to set it up properly. This works perfectly fine though for Conquer. I'll just show you very quickly using a random noob account. Oh, it'd help if I know my own password. Now note, it did connect to auth server successfully. That's just saying it forwarded the connection. Note, the login server disconnects it. That's because that happens. You go through the authentication stage and then it forwards you to the game server. This has me connected to the game server, so I'm actually finished logging in. I am on the proxy right now. This works perfectly fine. There's nothing fancy. I mean, there's no bot functionality done in this. That's why I posted it, so that you can just follow along and write your own code. That's just showing that if you followed the setup that I posted, it should work perfectly fine. See, it disconnected. That's all good and well. We don't need to worry about that at all right now. We have a few different steps that we want to go through. We need to create that settings file, which I did cover in the actual tutorial document. I just created a new text document, called it settings.txt. And if you look at the content, for now I'm just using login IP, proxy IP, and encryption key. You won't need to worry about that unless you're doing a private server. Let's say you want to make a bot for Trinity or one of the other current patch servers, but I just figured I'd put it in here so I had more than just one thing, because proxy IP is the only thing you'll really need to modify. This just gives you an idea of how to do more than one field at a time. Okay, so we have a few different steps that we need to follow here. We want to read from external files, so what we need to do is have a file to read, obviously, using what's called a stream reader. You don't need to know what that means. If you're really curious, you could look it up on Google, but again, I'm not going to worry about that too much. We need to read in the text from that file using a stream reader, and then we're going to do some basic operators such as split to sort of organize that information and figure out what it is that we want to assign to each variable, and then handle the return data to configure our proxy. To do this, we're going to create a new CS file. You don't actually have to. I just think it makes things a lot easier to do in the long run, because any read or write code using external files, I'm going to keep in that same CS file. It just organizes things nicely. Notice I have a few done here already. You don't really need to worry about them too much, but it's just good to have set up that way so you don't need to worry about it too much in the future. Just because I'm so used to having a file called this, I'm going to call it database, even though in this case it would be considered a flat file database. You don't need to worry about that though. It's just what I happen to be calling this. Okay, so we have a new CS file here. Again, a lot of you haven't really done much programming before, but I'm assuming you have opened up Visual Studio before. In this case, we want a public static class. You could Google all these definitions if you really want. Public means that it can be accessed from outside of the same class, which, I mean, is important because we want to be able to call methods inside of this from outside of it. Static means that there's no instances of it. You can't have more than one database class. For, let's say, the game user, it's not static because you can have more than one user. Anytime you would need to use, say, new, that means it's not static. So like new game user would be, again, a new instance of that object. Again, you could Google and look up all this stuff, but for now I'm just going to focus on how to do what we're trying to do right now, which is read from an external file. If you look at the sort of other file that I posted along with this video, I listed using statements. The reason I list this as a step is because you're going to need to think about it when you're trying to add things. Let's say I posted an example code in one of my tutorials and it's saying like we don't know what this means when in your error list here. Chances are either you've messed up or I've messed up by not telling you it has a using statement. In this case we need using IO, or sorry, system IO, which literally means system in and out. So it's a set of sort of handlers for using external files. So you can open, you can create new files, you can do all of that using the system IO. Now, we don't actually need that. What I could do is say public static void. This is just a little sample method. You don't need to think about it at all. But I could use system IO. See, we have binary reader, binary writer, and if I scroll down, there would be stream reader in here as well. Stream reader, stream writer, stream memory, stream, all that good stuff. That is all part of system IO. Using statements, just shorten that down so you don't need to type it every single time you want something from there. So I am going to use it, but just keep in mind that if, let's say you are making your own file, you need to remember to use this or it's just going to throw errors all over the place. Now, what we're going to do is write a very simple method. What a method is it's just a set of instructions that perform an action. It can have a return type or it can be void. In this case, we don't need it to return anything, but I'm going to have it return a bool, basically just saying if it succeeded or not. See, if I want it to return nothing, I would use void. In this case, I'm going to use bool. And I'm just going to call it load settings. It doesn't take any parameters, which would be going in here, because we only have one settings file, we don't need to worry about it. No, not all code paths return a value. That means it's not returning true or false. It has a return type, but we don't have one right now. In this case, return true. That will fix that error, because we are now returning true every time. There's no if statements blocking that out. We will always return true, which you don't want when you want to actually determine if something succeeded or not. You don't want a single return. You want sort of if this succeeds, then return true, else return false, all that good stuff. Again, doesn't really matter for now. All I'm going to do is create a new stream reader to import the information from this settings file. I'm going to call it SR just because I like short forms. Equals new stream reader because we're creating a new instance of that object. Now, if you notice, that requires a stream. Now, that again, you could look all this up, but in this case, all you need to do is file open. That accepts a string path and a file mode. Now, because I could do a hard-coded thing here where I say C program files, etc., where it's hard-coded to a specific location on your hard drive, I'm not going to do that because then it would not work for you. What I'm going to do is application startup path, which is literally saying where this application starts up, and then I can add on a file name after that. Now, if you notice, application. It's not actually defined in there. That's because it's another one of these using statements called system Windows form. Because I'm only using it once, I'm not going to bother having a using statement, just so I can demonstrate both and that they both work. Save application, and then I have startup path. That's all well and good. That gives me the folder here for my debug folder. It gives me computer D programming ProxyParadise bin debug. I still need to get settings.txt, so I'm going to use at, which basically says ignore the next thing, because of course that would be not something it would like to have in there. It's easier this way. So that's all well and good. I now have it loading from there. No, I've done something wrong here. It's not wanting to do, oh right, sorry, plus. I have to combine these strings using a plus operator. So file mode, again, you don't need to think about it. File mode, you can append, create new, open or create, or truncate. Truncate means clear whatever is in that file and then start writing it again. We don't need to think about all that right now. We just want to open it. So we have our stream reader. It is open the file. If it does not load, it will cause an exception, which basically means the program will stop. It'll pop up saying like, I can't find this file. It'll throw a big long list of errors and lines and where it's occurring. Most of them are very, very simple to see. So let's go back to our GUI here, and we are going to run database load settings. Now I just want to point out this is not because this is called database, or wherever it is, database.cs. It is because we have public static class database. If we call this database 1, this will not be able to find it. If I change that, so this can be, the actual class file can be called whatever you want. It all boils down to what the actual class inside of that file is named. It's just something good to know, because a lot of people I've had private message me saying how I've done something wrong and this is just not going to work, and it does. Oh, I forgot to close my brackets there. That's also very important. Yeah, it's just one of those things where I keep wanting to point out these very, very simple things in the introductory unit, just because I know a lot of people have never done coding before, and I don't want to have to answer the questions outside of this. So yes, we have our stream reader. Well, we can read a line, we can read a block, but in this case, we just want to read it to the end. So we're going to read absolutely everything in that file. But that will return a string, and what we want to do is, what I'm going to do actually is an array of strings, which that means you have a number of them. An array is simply a collection of data. You could have a list, you could have an array, you could have a dictionary, it doesn't matter. It's a collection, it holds them all together, and you can then access the various members of that collection. In this case, I'm going to call this lines equals stream reader read to end. Now, if I do that, it'll give an error because it's trying to convert a single string to an array of strings. What we can do, though, is use the split operator, which basically says every time you encounter this, split it into a new string. We want to stop paying attention to it. In this case, I'm going to use the new line operator, or new line character, whatever you want to call it. So every time it receives n, which is, there's return and there's n for new line. Return is an entry key, so that's what we're going to use. Every time we encounter r, it's going to split. So we've done that. Let's do a very, very quick test here in that we are calling database load settings. I just want to confirm that this is reading, and I'm going to show you how to handle error exceptions and all that good stuff. Okay, so we are going to say for each line L, string L in lines would make a lot more sense. We are going to console write line L. This just means we're going to write a string and after it do the return new line. L just means that's what we're labeling the current object that we're iterating through in our for each loop. Again, you can look all that up. I'm just assuming you either know or will just take my word for it that this is right, or at least one of the ways of doing things. So we have our login IP, proxy IP, encryption key. So that's all well and good. It works. So now what we need to do is take that information that we've just read and apply that to our settings here. So we have our public static string, game IP, port, auth IP, all that good stuff in here. We want to edit that using this information. Now, again, you don't need to particularly know what I'm talking about, but we are going to use a switch statement. And how that works is it basically says try and find this information in this long list of possible variables for it. If not, there's also a default variable. And if it matches, then go to that section of code. So in this case, I'm going to use the text file where it has the initial label, login IP, proxy IP, encryption key. I'm going to switch based on that. So I'm going to switch based on a string. So switch. Okay, I need to actually split this up again. So I'm going to switch based on, oh, right, so I need to do this for each one. I probably should have written this up beforehand in line. So for every string in that file, we're going to run this switch because we want to handle all of them, of course. So we are going to split based on the equals character. And the reason I'm doing that is because we will then get this is one section, and this is one section, which is exactly what we want to do. So we want to switch based on that split at 0. So that means the first part, the login IP. So now we can do case, so we have login IP. Notice you have to break because that gets out of the switch statement. Break gets you out of a loop, and switch just keeps looping until it finds something. Or well, it doesn't actually, but that's one of the ways to think of it. So now we have this. Now we need to take the second part here and apply that to the original game IP. Now actually I'm going to, okay, so GUI, oh sorry, login IP is what we're using. Equals L split at equals 1. Now I'm concerned that this is going to take in the return new line, but I'm just going to try it for now. So we have that. We have three things in total to handle. We have login IP, proxy IP, and encryption key. So those are going to be our switch statements. If we add another line in here, such as useless equals 1, this will still work because there is no handling for useless. It's not going to assign it to anything. It's just ignored. We still iterate through it because it is in our lines collection, but it's not handled because there's no switch statement for it. If I type this properly. Okay, so we're going to run a very, very quick test of this and just see how it works. Console write line. I am just testing this login thing because I want to make sure that there is no no issue with that return new line, and I don't want to post this and then everyone bitch at me because I did it wrong. Again, I didn't really bother writing any of this before I started recording, so I want to be sure of that. Auth IP plus. And the reason I put those single brackets, the colon there, or not colon, single bracket, oh my god, apostrophe, that's what I'm thinking of. The reason I put the apostrophe there is because I want to see exactly what this contains, so that this will exist, it will be written. Good, okay, so we're not having any sort of lines added in there. So we are now loading from an external file properly. Now, what happens though if we try and load settings1.txt? If you notice, in the debug folder, there is no file called that. Okay, so we threw an exception here called file not found exception, which, again, you should be able to interpret these errors very simply just by looking at them. If not, you can Google them. It's literally saying it could not find a file called this. That would be an issue because if the file is deleted for some reason, or if we're using a non-fixed name, let's say we were trying to load based on a character name for those settings. We want to try and load that file, but we still want to be able to continue the program if it doesn't exist. So what I'm going to use is what's called a try-catch block. Now, what happens here is the try code will literally try to run. It's exactly what it sounds like. If it throws an exception anywhere inside that try block, it will go immediately to the catch block. Now, what you can do for error reporting is you want to catch exception, and then you can call it whatever you want. I always call it P, that's just personal preference, exception P, and you could actually do console write line P. Now if we run this program again, notice it's still trying to load settings 1. The program will not crash, it'll still run, but we will actually receive a log of what the error was. It's again saying could not find file, etc., and where it occurs in it, including the lines and everything. This is useful if you want a stable program where not every single thing is going to be perfect the first time you write it, and you don't want it to crash out every single time something goes wrong. You'll want these try-catch blocks, but you also don't want to overuse them because you want the program to work and work well. You don't want to have to try and catch exceptions, you want to eliminate exceptions. But what we can use for this is, seeing as we have a bool here, we can try, and if this all succeeds, then we return true. If it doesn't succeed, we want to return false. Notice, it's still happy now because every possible outcome returns a value, either true or false. So that works perfectly fine. We don't need to worry about it because it's handled no matter what happens. If the file doesn't exist, the program will still run, and we have our default values in here, which again, this is a fairly pointless example because it is all hard-coded, but it's just a way of introducing people to how to do this. So we are now loading our settings, it is working properly, and that's all well and good. Notice there's no exception this time because I renamed it back to what it needs to be. So we are ready to accept connections. I'm actually going to go down here. Once this is all done, I'm going to say console write line. This is just a way of us knowing that, okay, everything went through okay, we have no issues, we can now have people start to log in. So that is all handled, and I'm just going to do, I should probably look back at this here. I probably should be jumping back to this more often, but yes, we created a new method here, load settings. We are opening the file and reading its contents using the stream reader and file open. We're reading its contents using read to end. Now what I need to do here is remember to close the reader. I am bad about that, a lot of people are bad about that. Once you've read the file, you want to SR close. The issue here is, if you were running this and tried to open it again and read it or write it or anything along those lines, you would get errors because the file is in use. You can't modify a file when it's locked. Now, this isn't an issue for a program like this, but let's say we were running 20 characters online, all botting, and they're all trying to access a single file. One user could be trying to modify that file while another program, or again, I keep saying program instead of user. One user could be trying to modify that file while another one tries to modify that file. If you don't close it, it will always be open until it crashes, their program closes, something along those lines. By using close, we're much safer with this. It's not perfect, but it eliminates 99.9999% of probability of us trying to access the same file while it's still open. This read to end probably takes 1 millisecond or less on modern computers. Again, with something this small, like 3 or 4 lines, it will not be an issue. We have, the computers are so fast, this read to end will take virtually no time whatsoever. So we are using that content by applying it to the variables we want. Sorry, we're processing it first, we're splitting it up and everything. We're using it, assigning it to variables, and we have tested it. You always want to test things, because if you are writing, this is one method, but let's say I was writing 50 methods to write an aimbot or a speed hack or anything like that. If I haven't tested each of those methods as I write them to at least get some idea of whether or not it's functional, it's going to be much, much more difficult to determine where the problem is happening if it doesn't work. And you always want to test your methods, or at least read them through after you've written them. Make sure you haven't made any stupid mistakes. Now, I am going to do a small part 2 here. I'm going to assume you've sort of understood everything I've said up till now, and I'm just going to write a very, very quick method to write to an external file. So I'm going to do public static void, because actually I'll do bool, I suppose. File exists. Okay, so in this case, I'm going to check if a file exists. this already exists, you don't need to worry about it. I'm writing it just as a way that you can check things in your mind. There is a file exists. That works perfectly fine. All I'm going to do with this is return my application startup path plus the string if that exists, because I don't want to have to write out the full path every single time. This is what I would consider a helper method. It's not needed, it just makes your life a lot simpler. So what I'm going to do is return file exists. Okay, so I'm going to do system Windows Forms application startup path plus at, I should do this actually, yes, path. The reason I did that is just so there's a bracket in there, because path is going to be file name actually. I should have corrected that. There, so this lets us say, does this file exist? Now what I could also do is I could add in more helper methods. Let's say I create a folder here called characters, and I want to log information for that character, say packets, character settings, anything along those lines. Public static bool what I could do here is return file exists. I could do this whole thing and add in characters to that string. It is literally just something that makes your job simpler. Again, I'm not going to bother with that right now because it's pointless. I don't need it. What I am going to do though is write a very simple write or append method, which is basically saying if this file exists, modify the information. Sorry, I'd actually be truncating it and then starting again, or I would create the file if it does not exist. That's all handled for you though in the IO section. So what I'm going to do here is public static void. I can't type while talking apparently. Okay, so here I am accepting two parameters, file name and information. If you look at my little document here, that's oh so useful, of just steps. We want to create a new method to do the writing. We are accepting parameters because we need information for this to write. Here we were not accepting parameters. The reason for that is we only have one settings file, we know where it is, and we're reading information out of it, not writing information into it. This lets us accept both of those things. So what we're now going to do is create the new file. In this case, we're actually going to create or modify that sort of thing. And we're going to use a stream writer this time using that new file. So I'm going to say and again, we need a stream source. So I'm going to do, we can do file create, file name. Again, we want it at application startup path. There. We now have a stream writer writing a new file there. This will pose an issue though because we might already have that file. Now there should be strange. I could have sworn that there was a create or open or create or write, but we'll just go with this for now. Now, this will let us write the entire information. Write line works exactly like, actually write and write line work exactly like they do in the console. Write will let you set entire sections of code or strings. Write line does a single line, which should make sense, and I have an alarm going off. There, much simpler. Okay, so in this case, we could have multiple lines, so we're just going to do write information. Now again, we're going to write it, and remember to close it. And we're going to test it. So again, I'm just going to do it at program startup because I don't want to have to wait until, let's say, a character logs in or anything like that. So I'm going to write information. The file name is going to be test. string. Information is going to be a long string of data to be written. Now, if we open the debug folder, there is no file here called test. I run this, we have no errors. That, again, should not happen anyways, it's fine. Test exists. Now, I left out one little thing here. We didn't add any extensions, so right now it's a file. It doesn't have any extension whatsoever. What I should have done is plus txt. Makes it a lot simpler when you do it right. So a long string of data to be written. Now, I have a very slight curiosity here of what happens if I try and do this again, because it's of course... Okay, good. It should just... If you do create, it will just overwrite whatever is there, I'm very sure. Again, I didn't test any of this before doing it, I'm just doing it all off memory. Yeah. It will write whatever you want. It will not add on to what's there, it'll just ignore everything in that file and write a new file. You might not want that sometimes, that's why you can do a open and see we have file open. We could do file mode, open or create. We could do create, truncate, append. Append means you open it and then write to the end of it. Again, you don't need to worry about all this right now. There we go. Back is my friend. Okay, so we've tested it, we've done writing to an external file, we've done reading from an external file. We've set up our stuff without issue, and I'm going to remove this because of course we don't need it. So what I will do is I will upload this video. I'm sorry it was a lot longer than I intended it to be, but whatever. I'll upload the video as well as these steps that I followed and a lovely companion here. And if I've missed something, please let me know and I will try and add it. Correction, or I will add it to the next unit or subunit. The next thing I want to do is go into working with the proxy and Conquer, so I'm going to go into packets, which is all the information going between the client and the server, and it's how you're going to perform all of your actions. So I'm going to do is go over what packets are. I'm going to build a simple packet logger so that we can keep track of all the information going between them. And then I'm going to do a small guide on how to structure them. There's a lot of good information out there. I posted a lot on it already as well. But what I'll do is I'll basically follow along with you structuring your first packet, and just I'll assign as much of my small amount of wisdom as I can to it and just say like, okay, this is what you need to be looking for, this is how to do it. And then we'll just go through and structure your first packet. That should be enough to get you set up, start structuring packets, start working through them, and then after that unit we will work on actually using those packets to do something. What I'm thinking we'll do is we'll write a minebot, because those are very simple to do. All we need to do is keep track of what we have in our inventory, simple logic of whether or not we want to drop it, and then the actual dropping action. That's all you need to do for a minebot, so I'm going to start with that because we'll only need a few packets. So we'll structure those together and then we will write the basic minebot together. So again, I hope you guys are going to enjoy these videos, and if I'm sort of going off base of where you want them to go, let me know. I'm just sort of shooting in the dark here because I really don't know what you guys want. I'm just trying to start as basic as possible. Anyways, thanks. I'll talk to you next time.